In this video, I'm going to compare this walking foot attachment to one of my walking foot sewing machines. First, I just need to pick one. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Hello, sewing people of the internet. In this video, I'm going to try to answer a question that I've had for a long time. And that is, does one of these walking foot attachments allow your standard domestic non-walking foot sewing machine to function as well as or similarly to a walking foot machine? Let's find out. So if you haven't seen one of these, this attaches to the presser foot attachment point. And then this arm just slips over the screw that holds the needle into the needle bar. And as the needle bar goes up and down, it causes these little feed dogs here to move up and down, similar to the way the walking feet on a walking foot machine move up and down. And this is really designed to help evenly feed multiple layers of fabric. So for this video, I'm going to use my Singer 237, arguably one of my most capable domestic non-walking foot sewing machines. And I'm going to compare it to my Sailrite LS1 Ultra Feed. Hi. I've done perhaps the unthinkable. I had a worker bee power pack mounted. Thanks, buddy. For the purposes of this video, I've removed the worker bee. If you've been following my channel at all or if you know anything about Sailrites, I had a worker bee motor on this, and as soon as I'm done with this video, I'm going to put it back on. But to make it a little bit more of a fair comparison, I took that off and put the standard household motor that came on this Ultra Feed to begin with. I think it's still a little bit more powerful than the 237, but it's closer anyway. I want to start out by making some predictions, I've put this on my Singer 201 and tried a couple of very small things just to kind of see. And honestly, I was much more impressed than I expected to be by what it did. I don't have the highest of hopes. This is a combination of pieces of plastic and metal. It's not the most, it cost me $20, so clearly this is not the highest quality item that you could get. You know, I don't expect this to be equivalent. I'm expecting this to fall well short of doing what this machine can do in terms of feeding difficult to feed materials. That said, like, my understanding of what this is designed for is more for quilting and, you know, household materials that are just more difficult to feed multiple layers and stuff. This is not going to turn the 237 into a leather working machine. I just want to make sure that we all have realistic expectations. And, you know, if I end up making fun of this thing for not being able to do something, or if it seems like that, like, I realize that comparing this little assembly to an actual walking foot machine isn't a fair comparison. However, it's come up in enough comments that I think it's worth finding out whether this is a good step in between having a machine like this and jumping up to a machine like this, or if you're better off saving your 20 bucks. Before we go further, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, the Coquina 3000. Do you ever find that when you put your folded clothing into a drawer and then later come back, it's exactly where you left it? How boring. With the Coquina 3000 automated folded clothing randomizer, you can have the excitement of not knowing where your other sock is every time you open the drawer. The Coquina 3000 is completely autonomous. Just open the drawer and let it do its thing. You'll never be bored by knowing exactly where your socks are ever again. Offer not valid in all 50 states, void where prohibited, some restrictions apply. So for the first test, I've got this foam that's maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. It's kind of like something you would use for like a backpack strap, a little bit firmer than that. I'm just using it because I have some scrap pieces of this. It's not really something I would normally use, but it'll serve for testing purposes. I'm going to wrap it in this, I think this is 1.9 ounce sil nylon ripstop, but you get the idea. I'm going to try sewing some fabric and sewing through this foam, and this is very slippery fabric, so this should be a good test for the ability to evenly feed this. I'm going to sew it on the Sailrite first to see how it does, and then we'll try the 237 as it sits, and then with the walking foot attachment. It's actually a little bit easier to get that under the foot on this machine, oddly. Well, that doesn't want to feed at all. Yeah, if I help it, but if I don't give it some push, it's not feeding it at all. I want to point out that there's no issue with the needle penetrating this. There was no issue with not having enough power, especially once it got going right at the beginning. It seemed like it struggled a little bit, but the problem here is with the feeding. This is something I've talked about a lot with domestic machine versus a portable walking foot or an industrial walking foot machine. It often doesn't come down to needing more power. It's just the ability to feed that is the problem. But anyway, let's try the walking foot attachment. If you haven't seen one of these before, it just attaches in place of your regular presser foot. I would say that's not terribly encouraging. I'm trying to get the material far enough back for the feed dogs and the upper feed dogs on the walking foot attachment to engage it. Okay, there we go. The 237 doesn't have as long of a stitch length as the Sailrite does, so it doesn't have the same appearance. But once it got going, it fed okay. Definitely harder to get it into position far enough for the upper feed dogs to start doing their job, though. One alternative material I like to use a lot is motorcycle inner tube. I like to put this on the bottom of backpacks and other bags. So let's see how this sews on these machines. Well, I already knew how that was going to come out, and one layer of this is easy for this machine. Let's try it on the 237. That actually did really great for one layer. I'm not even going to bother putting the walking foot on because that did so well with one layer, it's sort of pointless. So let's try with 2 layers and see how that works. So not so good that time. It pulled the bottom layer through faster than the top layer. Kind of what you would expect since it's feeding from the bottom. I'm not sure how related it is, but the tension was pretty terrible too. So now we'll try 2 layers with the walking foot attachment on. Well, that's not working well at all. Maybe that's something I did. Let's try again. Just going to run a sample that I sewed earlier and make sure that everything is working properly here, because that's not looking good. Yeah, that's fine now. So I'm going to say that In this example, 2 pieces of motorcycle inner tube on the Singer 237 with the walking foot attachment, no bueno. Let's try the 2 on the Sailrite just to make sure. And just to drive the point home, that's 4 layers, and I mean, honestly, I could probably do 8. The thread is starting to shred from the friction of going through all the rubber, but as you can see, the machine doesn't care at all. I suppose it's inevitable, if we're talking about walking foot machines, we're going to have to talk about leather. So I just want to give kind of some caveats. I've said this a lot in the past, but I think it's worth repeating. There's a vast difference between some leathers and other leathers, and any sewing machine can sew leather, but most sewing machines can't sew leather like you would use for gun holsters or horse saddles or, you know, serious leather work. If you're making something like handbags or wallets out of, you know, reasonably thin leathers, I mean, you can even do thinner leathers on a regular domestic sewing machine, but, you know, if you need a walking foot, something like this is fine. But, you know, true leather working machines are a different category of machine entirely and outside of the scope of this discussion. So anyway, I have some leather here. This is relatively, I'd call this on the thicker end of what I would want to do with the machines that I use. But it would be excellent material for wallets. In fact, the wallet I've carried for the last several years is made out of some of this leather. So let's see how it does. I'm going to go ahead and just go right to 2 layers of this leather. And I already know how this is going to go because I've sewn this with this machine before. And obviously it sews it beautifully, no problem. And now we'll try the 237 with the standard foot. Not bad. And this is kind of to my point. I mean, that actually did a beautiful job. Now, obviously, if we got into too many more layers, it might change things. But if you're just sewing a couple of pieces of leather together to make, you know, a pocket for something or a small wallet or whatever, something like the 237 can actually do a pretty nice job. Let's see if the walking foot makes it any easier or better. By the way, I'm not using a leather needle in either one of these machines, just a universal needle. So I just wanted to jump in here. I was actually trying to make a mock-up of something to do another comparison with. I started having some difficulty, so I thought I should probably show you. So what I'm doing is I'm simulating the top of a bottle pocket for a backpack. And usually there'd be a hem here with some elastic in it. I've just sewn some webbing into it. Right now all I'm sewing through is 3 layers of 1680 denier ballistic nylon. And for some reason, this is what's happening. It's not going anywhere. So that's a little bit interesting. I'm going to take this foot off and try something. The thumb screw holding the foot was a little bit loose. I'm not sure if that was the issue, but nope. So I'm going to leave the camera rolling for a second here and swap this out. The reason I'm finding this a bit perplexing is I've sewn at least a couple of layers of 1680 on this machine with the regular presser foot, So I'm surprised that it's having so much difficulty with the walking foot on it. I would expect the walking foot to improve the feeding of things, maybe not as much as using a walking foot machine, but what I would not expect is for it to be worse. And that kind of seems like what was happening with this particular material. So I'm just going to go to the same place. That's very interesting. I mean, as you can see, that had no issue at all. But for some reason with the walking foot, and I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be some expert with these walking feet. There's certainly something I could be getting wrong, but for some reason it did not like that material. Interesting. So what I'm going to simulate here is something I've encountered when I make backpacks. This is 1680 denier ballistic nylon with a 400 denier nylon pack cloth liner, and I'm simulating a side seam being sewn to the front panel with what would be a water bottle pocket with a seam on top with some elastic in it. So what I'm going to do is sew the two panels together and then up to where the water bottle pocket joins, and that creates a thicker area that we have to overcome. So we'll see how that works. I already know that the Sailrite will do this just fine, so we're just going to go ahead and go to the 237 without the walking foot attached. So basically that handled that with no issue. Even though the 237 handled that just fine without the walking foot, I'm curious to see if the walking foot makes any difference, good or bad. So I've taken the seam apart, we're going to run it again, this time under the walking foot. To be honest with you, I didn't see any difference other than it's noisier with this walking foot attachment on, but it seemed like it fed about the same both times. So I could probably spend all day trying to find things that make the point, but it seems like it's pretty much made to me. For $20, the walking foot attachment is probably not a bad thing to have, because there might be some materials like that foam that it really did help the machine feed it better, and it might be worth having. It's $20. Then again, this whole machine cost me $20, so maybe a $20 foot is kind of pricey when you look at it that way. So does a walking foot attachment make a domestic machine function just like a walking foot machine? In my opinion, not even close. But again, depending on what your needs are, it may be a viable option for you. My opinion remains the same. I think, these are my last two machines that I would get rid of if I had to pair. Well, I'd probably keep my Zigzag Ultra Feed now instead of this one, but in any event, having a vintage domestic non-walking foot machine for sewing lighter weight materials, and then having something like a Sailrite Ultra Feed or an industrial walking foot machine for sewing the stuff that I usually use, the heavier waxed canvases, the heavier synthetic fabrics and webbing, and sewing on binding and zippers and that kind of stuff. So I don't think the walking foot is going to make me be able to only have one machine. It's still going to be a struggle a lot of the time. So that's what I came up with. If you know differently or have a different opinion or questions about any of this, post it in the comments section below. If you like this video, clicking on the like button is always a great way to help me out. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram. There's a link in the description. And if you like stuff like this shirt, buying it from the link in the description is also a great way to help me keep making these videos. I hope you found that helpful. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time. I told them you were going to be in this video, buddy. He thinks there's a lizard on the patio, so he doesn't care about you guys right now. Sorry.